Today, we're diving into something massive happening in India's legal world. The country has just swapped out its 160-year-old criminal code, yeah, a relic from the colonial era, with a brand new set of laws called the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or BNS for short. And believe me, this isn't just a simple update, it's a complete overhaul of how crime and punishment are defined for over 1 billion people.
Just think about it for a second. What if the laws defining things like theft or assault or even murder in your country were written way back in 1860? Well, that was the reality for India until just now. Its entire criminal justice system was built on the Indian Penal Code, the IPC, which was drafted during British rule. And you can imagine, the world's changed just a little bit since then.
So, to really get our heads around this huge shift, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at exactly why that old law book was so out of date. Then, we'll get to know the new BNS and its structure. We'll dive into the brand new crimes it defines for our modern world, and also which old laws are getting tossed out. Most importantly, we'll break down what this all means in practice with real examples. And finally, we'll look at the road ahead.
All right, so let's start with the big why. Why the change? What was so wrong with the law that had been working, more or less, for over 150 years? Well, the short answer is that the Indian Penal Code was a product of its time, and that time is long, long gone.
I mean, this slide really lays it out. It's like night and day. On one hand, you've got the IPC from 1860, written in this really dense Victorian English, a colonial law for a colonial purpose. And on the other, you have the new BNS from 2023, which is designed to reflect modern Indian values. It uses much simpler language, and crucially, it's built to tackle 21st century problems the original authors could never have dreamed of, like cybercrime.
So, what does this new framework actually look like? Let's get into the BNS itself. The big goals here were all about making things simpler, better organized, and, of course, more modern.
The very first thing you'll probably notice is that it's just smaller. The BNS takes all 511 sections from the old IPC and trims them down to 358. Now, this isn't about just deleting laws. It's about getting rid of redundancies and grouping related offenses together, which should make the whole code a lot easier to work with.
And here's how they did that streamlining, which is actually pretty smart. First, they put all the legal definitions in one single place, Section 2, and put them in alphabetical order, so no more hunting through hundreds of pages for a definition. Second, the chapters themselves are in a new, more logical order. For instance, crimes against women and children are now right up front, which sends a pretty clear signal about priorities. And third, like we said, similar crimes are now bundled together, so all the different kinds of thefts, for example, are in one convenient spot.
Okay, now we get to one of the biggest changes of all, how the BNS actually brings the law into the modern age. For the very first time, India's National Criminal Code is officially defining crimes that just weren't a thing back in 1860.
Just take a look at this list. These are all huge issues today that the old law just didn't have the language for. The BNS now has specific, clear-cut definitions and punishments for things like organized crime, terrorism, mob violence, and a whole range of cybercrimes. It also introduces a controversial new offense, having sex with someone based on a false promise of marriage.
Now, having a clear national definition for organized crime is a huge deal. Before, it was handled by a messy patchwork of different state laws. Now, Section 11 gives law enforcement one single, powerful tool to go after criminal syndicates, whether they're involved in contract killing or massive cyber fraud, and it comes with some really tough penalties.
And in a similar way, the BNS confronts the horrific issue of mob violence head-on. Section 103 now defines murder by a mob of 5 or more people, specifically when it's based on identity, like race or caste or religion, as its own distinct crime. This is so important because it formally recognizes a specific social evil and makes it crystal clear that every single person in that mob can face the absolute harshest penalties, right up to life in prison or even the death penalty.
Of course, modernizing a law isn't just about adding new things. It's also about taking out the trash. The BNS officially gets rid of several old colonial laws that were either unconstitutional, totally outdated, or just plain weird by today's standards.
Okay, this one is probably the most debated change. The old colonial-era sedition law is gone, by name anyway. But in its place, we have a new law, Section 152, that targets acts endangering India's sovereignty and integrity. Now here's the catch. Critics argue that this new law is actually broader than the old one. It uses vague phrases like subversive activities and punishes exciting dissatisfaction. So while the word sedition has been repealed, A new and potentially even more powerful offense has taken its place. The BNS also does a bit of spring cleaning, officially getting laws that were already dead off the books. For example, the laws that criminalized adultery and consensual same-sex acts had already been thrown out by India's Supreme Court, so the new code just makes it official. It also removes some truly bizarre colonial leftovers, like the specific crime of being a thug, and it finally decriminalizes attempting suicide, reframing it as a mental health issue, not a crime. Okay, so we've talked about the big picture changes, but how does this actually affect the definition of common, everyday crimes? Let's look at a few examples straight from the new law to see how this plays out in the real world.
Let's start with a really basic one: theft. The definition here is pretty much what it's always been. It boils down to a few key things. You have a dishonest intent, you take movable property, and you do it without permission. The legal trigger here is the simple act of moving the property, even just a tiny bit.
And this example, which comes directly from the law itself, makes that point perfectly clear. The crime isn't committed when the person drags the tree away. Nope. It's committed the instant the tree is cut down with that dishonest intention. The BNS is full of these kinds of specific examples to make things as unambiguous as possible.
All right, next up, extortion. Now, this is different from theft because it involves a threat. The key ingredient here is fear. The criminal puts someone in fear of some kind of injury to force them to hand over their property.
And check out this example from the text. The threat isn't physical harm to the person, Z, but to their child. By using that fear to force Z to sign a document, A has committed extortion. It's a great illustration of how the threat doesn't have to be directed at the person who's being forced to act.
Now for assault. This is a really important one because a lot of people get it mixed up. In legal terms, assault isn't actually hitting someone. That's called battery. Assault is the act of making someone believe they are about to be hit. It's all about creating that fear of immediate harm.
And here is the absolute classic example. No one gets touched. Just shaking a fist at someone with the intent of making them think they're about to be punched is legally an assault. In the eyes of the law, the harm is the fear that you create. And here's something completely new that the BNS introduces: new types of punishment. For the first time in India's national code, community service is now an official option for smaller offenses. This means that for something like a first-time petty theft, instead of a fine or jail time, a judge can order the offender to do work that helps the community. It's a clear signal towards a more rehabilitative approach for minor crimes.
Okay, we've covered the old laws, the new structure, and some real-world examples. So for our final section, let's just zoom out and think about the big picture: the impact of this enormous legal change, and the challenges that are still to come.
So where does all of this leave us? Well, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is, without a doubt, a monumental step forward. It modernizes the language, it simplifies the structure, and it finally writes laws for a digital world. On paper, it is a modern code. But the real question, the one that truly matters, is this: can it deliver modern justice in practice? The success of this whole thing won't be decided by the words on the page. It'll be decided by how it's used by police, lawyers, and judges on the ground every single day. A new foundation has been laid, for sure, but the real work is just getting started.